Hello, welcome. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Peter Calabrese. I'm CEO of CanAm Investor Services. CanAm Investor Services, we are the FINRA registered broker-dealer affiliate of CanAm Enterprises, one of the largest, certainly most successful regional centers in the history of the EB-5 program. We always look to bring good, timely educational content to you all out there, and today is no different. Actually, we have a very special pleasure of being joined by three luminaries in the EB-5 field. Mr. Nicolai Hinrichsen, partner from Miller Mayer, Mr. Rohit Turkhud, partner from CSG Law, and Mr. Niral Patel, partner from KLDP. They're here to talk to us about just the current state of the Indian market, where the visa bulletin is, things that you should be looking at as everyone tries to work with such urgency to try to complete an EB-5 investment before the September 30th filing deadline, some do's and don'ts that we can look at for, and some real actionable items that you can use in helping to get yourself to making a good, appropriate, and well thought out EB-5 decision. So with that, before we start getting in, Nicolai, if you'd like to give us a quick introduction, we can go around and we can kind of get started with the conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pete. Again, Nicolai Hinrichsen. I'm the managing partner of Miller Mayer's EB-5 practice. Miller Mayer's been involved in the EB-5 program since it started way back in 1993. And I've been personally involved in EB-5 since 2007. So we represent investors from all over the world, including India. We certainly have the expertise to help people through the process.
Rohit?
Hi, thanks, Pete, for inviting me for this wonderful webinar. I'm Rohit Turkhud, partner at CSG Law, which is a full-service law firm. The firm itself has been involved in EB-5 for much more than a decade. I've been involved for well over 12 years, representing investors principally from India, irrespective of their nationality. Travel a lot to India. I've already been there 4 times this year. Happy to help investors and work through their challenges and issues. Thanks, Pete.
Wonderful. Niral?
So thanks, Pete and CanAm, for organizing this during the busiest time for attorneys. But, glad to be here with all of you. My name's Niral Patel. I'm a partner at KLDP. We're a full-service immigration firm specializing in EB-5. I've been involved with EB-5 for over a decade now. Used to be out in California, now out in New York.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And Niral, obviously, you nailed it, that this is a tremendously busy time. And obviously, I appreciate you guys all taking the time out to talk about this. But I think when sometimes when people get busy, it's easy to kind of get too fractured. Your mind starts going a million different ways. And so what we try to do is really try to help people to move efficiently towards how they can actually take steps to go ahead and do this. So the first step, and I think that I would say this to anyone and anyone who has talked to me about one of our projects or about our offerings would hear me say that the first step and the most important step that you could take right now is to hire an immigration attorney and to get yourself working on that, because there's a lot of people moving towards trying to make an investment soon. Right. There's a lot of urgency in the market. And with that can sometimes lead to maybe skipping steps or potentially moving yourself towards not the best outcomes when you do so. So maybe, Nicolai, if you want to kick us off on, just what you're seeing right now and some of the bigger obstacles that you're seeing from people from the market in India trying to go ahead and complete an investment.
Yeah, I mean, there are two big drivers for Indian nationals right now in the EB-5 market. The first you referred to, which is the September 30th grandfathering deadline. I think people understand what that is, but just briefly, it's a provision in the Reform and Integrity Act that states that as long as you submit your petition before September 30th, 2026, even if the program isn't extended, your petition would still be adjudicated by the government. The other big driver is the potential for retrogression, or I would say the inevitability of retrogression. So we expect at some point in time a final action date to occur for Indian nationals in both the rural and high unemployment set-aside category, and probably also infrastructure. And once that final action date happens, an Indian national would no longer be able to concurrently file. So there's tremendous interest in EB-5. I think that the Indian professionals in the United States have recognized the value proposition of EB-5. There's been a lot more, I think, internal dialogue in large companies about what EB-5 can offer. And because of that, we've seen a significant level of interest. The difficulty is we're getting close to September 30th. So the challenges now really are, can we do an EB-5 petition before September 30th? Is it worth considering waiting until after September 30th? We'll touch on that a little later, I think. But I do think there's a benefit to filing before September 30th if possible. I think it still is possible, depending on the complexity of the source of funds. But that's really what we're seeing coming in the door now in terms of issues is what is my strategy and how quickly can I execute on that strategy?
Yeah. Maybe if you could expand on that a little bit and speak to your experiences a little.
Yeah, and I think Nicolai pretty much covered it. For everyone out there, to get your petition approved, it's basically comes down to two requirements: project receiving 956F approval, and then source of funds. Now, when you're already gone with a solid project like CanAm, the 956F is pretty much assured. So then it all comes down to source of funds. And I think, when we were doing source of funds, let's say a year or even 2 years ago, we were sort of preparing them a lot differently than we are now. And CIS doesn't make an announcement saying this is how we're going to start adjudicating cases. We only find out how they're adjudicating cases, their standards, their trends, when they start issuing these crazy RFEs, NOIDs, and even what we're seeing now are straight denials. And so what used to take us maybe a week or 2 weeks is now taking us closer to 4 to 6 weeks, just because of the level of information and documentation CIS is requesting. So my advice to clients is, look, if you're trying to make the September 30th deadline, great. Let's assess your source of funds. Let's see realistically what we can get done in that time frame. I don't want to rush someone's immigration for the sake of this deadline, because that might help you in the short term, but it's not going to help you in the long term. So it's really important to, if you have the financial means and the documentation to get started. If not, and we'll probably discuss this later, there's still a way forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Rohit, maybe if you could touch on the subject a bit as well.
Yeah, thank you. Again, Nicolai and Niral have pretty much exhaustively addressed the issue. Clearly, source of funds is super critical. And I think, like Niral has said, certainly need to assess whether the person is in a position to file. And especially something, again, that we might discuss later. We've had this guidance from the immigration issue just yesterday, which talks about the fact that they might take even greater liberties with issuing outright denials, as opposed to issuing an RFE or NOID, however crazy they may be. They were certainly a welcome relief or a welcome alternative to an outright denial. So I think it's really important for the individuals to engage with their attorneys or engage an attorney if they haven't done so yet, even as they explore the correct regional center. Clearly, there's no two ways about the credibility, the validity, and the preferences for working with a regional center like CanAm, clearly. But again, without an attorney, you're not going to go too far in terms of your source of funds and filing your application, filing it as complete and as approvable at the time of filing as possible, to avoid, if possible, an RFE or a NOID, or even worse, an outright denial.
Yeah. And I think that is a really great point. It really sums up is the approvability. Because what everyone is saying is, yes, there's a September 30th deadline for grandfathering, but no effort going towards getting an investment done before then should trump or supersede your approvability of it. You want to make sure you're keeping the main goal in mind of making sure that you are having a petition that's going to be approved. And it's not helpful to anyone involved to just have this to have your priority date set if it comes at the risk of bringing a much higher likelihood of denial. And especially in the current atmosphere of USCIS's approvals and their adjudications that they've been presenting. I'd like to circle back, on a point, especially Nicolai made in talking about where investors should be viewing and how they should be looking at the entirety of their journey, especially as it pertains to retrogression. Because the reality is, and we've talked about this on a bunch of our pieces and talked about with you guys either privately or just in these sorts of settings, there's going to be retrogression in these set aside categories. That is just the reality of the number of volume of investments that have been made. I mean, there's been recent data that now came out from USCIS that there's been over 8,000 petitions filed in high employment and rural area projects, and a lot of them coming from Indian nationals, Chinese nationals, and those being the vast majority. So the reality is that you are able to make an investment into this with the filing date being now current, not from a lack of interest or a lack of filing, it's from a lack of adjudication. And so when you take that as the basis for when you're looking at making this going forward, just knowing that there's a tremendous opportunity that is available to you in the ability to concurrently file because these statuses are current, but to understand also that there is going to be a timeline in terms of wait time for these adjudications. With the movements of the Bulletin, there are also some silver linings that go along with that, or some very good outcomes, such as the movement in the unreserved category for India. That's happened. All of the visas for the unreserved category from last year were used. Some people might say, looking at that, you might say, oh no, that those are used. This is a very good thing because it means that those pre-RAA investors are getting moved forward. And it means that there's a good, strong likelihood that all of those unreserved visas could be used, and that entire backlog could be completed by next year. So maybe when you look at this and you look at the visa, there are things that are positive in terms of the moves of the visa bulletin, but also making sure that you're aware of what the visa bulletin means. So that was a lot of talk for me. I'd love to hear maybe from the actual experts in the room here a little bit more. And Rohit, maybe if you could talk a little bit about how the visa bulletin and some of these movements work into your conversations with clients and how you advise them.
Thank you. Well, I focus on the fact that, like you correctly said, lack of adjudication and not lack of interest is what's keeping the visa numbers available under the three targeted employment categories of rural, high unemployment, and the infrastructure. I also try to explain to the clients the fact that there are 10,000 visas globally available. No country is allowed to use more than 7.1% or 700 and then try and break that up. We do end up having conversations with clients or potential clients who believe that they can do the calculations and do the math and actually predict the availability of visas. And I do try to impress upon them that people certainly better than myself, but probably even better than them, have tried and failed for years to kind of predict when the visa numbers are going to become available. And I think that they try to understand that, but they always, of course, clients who are very well qualified in engineering, mathematics, and many successful businesses like to determine that they can predict how long it's going to take to get a visa. And we all recognize that that's just not possible. So I do try to work that in. I also try to actually show them the visa bulletin and explain the difference between final action dates that Nicolai referred to earlier and filing dates, which are different and which may actually be of great advantage to them as they go ahead. And I think all of those things factor into presenting to the clients and explaining that September 30th is a real date. They should try and take advantage of that if they can. And sometimes I'll actually question a client when they say, well, we want to file the petition. We just don't want to file the adjustment of status. That's a fine conversation when the person is not India born. But I think it has a certain completely different significance when the individual is born in India.
No, it's helpful. Niral, maybe if you could expand on that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think I take a practical approach with my clients. I explain to them that, look, we're attorneys, we're not fortune tellers. Our job is to take the information that we have today, the knowledge that we have today, and we give a risk reward analysis on what the outlook is based on whatever actions you decide. So today, you control what you control and you understand what the unknowns are. You can control the quality of the project you go into. You can control the quality of your source of funds documentation today. Today, we know that the visa bulletin is current so that you can apply for the adjustment of status, lock in an early priority date, and get that work permit and travel permit. At some point, we know retrogression will happen because the whole entire US immigration system is built on demand and supply. When demand exceeds supply, that's when you have retrogression and a backlog. So we know that because of the sheer number of people applying, at some point you're going to have retrogression, just like you do in the other categories, EB1, 2, and 3. And so the key is to remember that even when retrogression is announced, first, you don't know which category is going to retrogress first. Then you don't know for how long retrogression is going to happen. I think a lot of people, once a backlog is announced, are going to make a snap judgment and say, oh, this is now automatically going to take 5 years. People need to remember that you still need almost 8 to 12 months of data to understand how priority dates move on a month-to-month basis to get a clear understanding of what this backlog even looks like. And so these are the types of conversations that we have with our clients, having to understand what are your short-term goals, what are your long-term goals. If you're in an EB2, EB3 backlog, then even retrogression EB5 is still going to be better than the EB2 and EB3. So that's how we sort of approach this.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Nicolai, I mean, if you want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the value proposition is really the same, right? I think you can assess what do I get from EB-5 by looking. I say value proposition, I mean the long term, right? You're in it for a green card. You're likely going to get that green card before you would get an EB2 green card based green card. So even though we can foresee that there's going to be a wait, most certainly that wait is going to be shorter than other immigration processes individuals may have been pursuing before EB-5. And EB-5 is predictable. I mean, we are talking about more scrutiny from USCIS, and that certainly is true. But all of the people in this call have decades of EB-5 experience. We know what goes into an approvable petition. We can't guarantee an outcome, but we can certainly say with a high degree of confidence, yes, we think this is an approvable petition. And so while it may pen for a while, or even it'll be approved and then you're waiting for the green card will someday be at hand. And that really is the ultimate value proposition here. The short-term value proposition is also there, of course, for people who concurrently file. You can get an EAD card and an advanced parole. I think, I generally tell my clients that if possible, they should stay in there and keep their non-immigrant status, particularly if they're H-1B workers. These days, you're only getting AP or advanced parole for 18 months. So it used to be 5 years. So that, in terms of relying on an EAD card that's only has 18-month validity period is a little more problematic. And then just generally, it's good practice to maintain the underlying non-immigrant status where possible. A little trickier for F students, but it can be done. And so that, like, the value proposition of EB-5, I think some people think, oh, I can get work and travel authorization. Yes, you can, but I'd rather you avoid that actually and continue to utilize your current non-immigrant status for that until you get the EB-5.
Yeah, it's always a question of choosing the best pathway for you, the individual investor. And being in the situation that we are, but I think you guys are probably in the same situation, is that for so many of these people, EB-5 is the best pathway towards long-term stability in terms of their immigration status, long-term permanent residency. Now, that doesn't mean that it comes quickly, but comparatively to all of these other outlets, I think that there is a lot. And there are a lot of silver linings to be had when looking at the EB-5 program right now as well. The ability to concurrently file is a huge one. And yes, the reality is there is retrogression that is growing. There is a backlog that's growing. But frankly, we probably could have had this same discussion with a client 6 months, 12 months ago about the amount of investment that has come in and the adjudications taking the time that they are to move their way through. So the fact that this concurrent filing window has remained open is an important one for people. I think that Niral, you touched on in kind of our pre-talk about, one of the benefits that is in place because of the sustainment period.
Yeah.
The current interpretation of the sustainment period, meaning that, you do still have the ability, obviously EB-5 projects have commercial terms that you would be subject to in terms of loan terms and whatnot, but the sustainment period allows for you to have your funds returned back at the completion of those commercial terms, as opposed to potentially having to wait for your conditional green card to come and to complete that time period like a pre-RA investor. So, I mean, there are those benefits that come in that are available as well. I think that when looking at the time frame of when people are going to actually be able to get these benefits, I do think that the move in the unreserved category is an important one, because that should free up the actual flow of visas from that unreserved category to the reserved category. Now, there is, and this is something we talked about a little bit, and maybe in some of conferences and whatnot, there is a little bit of a, I would say, gray area, or maybe a point of clarification that needs to be done in terms of people who have filed for an adjustment of status and their ability to accept a visa from the unreserved category at the time that they are able to go and to receive those visas, akin to an overseas investor who is going for their consular interview. I don't know if one of you guys would want to touch on that as something, because I do think it is something that is it's important. I think it's assumed, and I think we all assume that will be the case. But I think it's something that could use some clarification. Maybe if one of you guys would like to touch on that.
Sure, I can set the ball rolling and then let Nicolai and Niral take it from there as well. I think all of us would agree that we need additional guidance and clarification from the USCIS. It's not very different from the ability of people who are on an EB2 or EB3 to have approved petitions sitting in both cases, the EB2 and EB3, and then trying to decide which adjustment of status would benefit them depending on the visa numbers. Here we're drawing a parallel with the unreserved category and then one of the targeted employment categories. And of course, we also have the possibility that a project may qualify in the rural and high unemployment, or any one or more of those combinations. And the immigration seems, or the NVC certainly seems to be taking the position right now that you've got to select as to whether you want to pick a number from the targeted employment category or the unreserved category. People are going to be reluctant to do that because we don't have certainty on which category will get us the green card the fastest. And therefore, we would like to see some guidance from the immigration as to how do you get to select? At what point do you get to pick it? What's the logistical procedure or the process for selecting that category? We realize these are not necessarily easy questions to answer, but I think guidance would help in terms of us being able to offer guidance to the clients as well. Right now, we do punt a little in the dark and try to do the best we can for the clients. So, I'll leave it at that and let Nicolai and Niral expand on that as well.
I actually think that the guidance is going to come when we actually have to go through it. It's just right now we don't have to go through it, but at some point we will have to. And I think when one of us, or someone in our industry, actually either submits an inquiry with the 45 Service Center or even the IPO, whatever it is, at that point we will probably get some sort of response that's going to give us that guidance. I don't think until then, I don't trust CIS to come out and say this is how you're supposed to do something.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is going to come to a head. I mean, arguably, if the State Department is giving us a choice now, so too should USCIS. You could very well choose an unreserved category or a set-aside category, and I think USCIS just assumes you're going to choose a set-aside category because that's what you invested in, but that's not a correct assumption necessarily. And to Niral's point, if an individual is investing in a project with two set-asides, there is a real choice. And I don't see how USCIS can default reasonably to one of those without inquiring of the petitioner which they prefer, which they choose.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
I think all, I'm not sure if you folks have seen it, but I've certainly seen an applicant being issued the conditional green card for EB-5, although the applicant was entitled and had a pending immediate relative case, which would have given them an unconditional green card. So I've seen them do that without asking. We thought that they would invite us for an interview and give you that choice. They didn't do that. And later on, believe it or not, they denied the adjustment of status application that was pending under the IR, saying you didn't show up for an interview, for which they were never even invited. So I wouldn't be placing too many bets on anything reliable coming out of the USCIS, but I'm certainly hopeful that they'll give us some guidance.
That's interesting. Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, and which is why, and I think you guys are right. I think that this is something that is going to start presenting itself, that that the industry is definitely going to need to be attentive to, and we certainly want to be attentive to it as well. But yeah, again, it's why we appreciate the real time insights of you gentlemen as the industry is changing and some of these interpretations are coming into play. With that in mind, in terms of good real-time kind of insights to be able to provide to people, now that we've talked to investors and they've now determined, yes, they definitely want to move forward, and they know that it's time. And there have been some strategies that people have been able to use in the past that maybe are receiving some different interpretations as people are moving forward. One of those, and I'll kick it up to you guys. When an investor comes and says, I want to make an investment before September 30th, but realistically, I'll probably need until October, November to finish funding. Can I file with a partial investment and go ahead and get my priority date before the deadline comes in? Niral, I'll let you kick this off. You've had to go second a couple of times.
We're a big fan of partials, and I think it changes along with adjudication trends. I think previously we were allowed to be a little bit more liberal with partial investments. You invest a certain amount now, the balance later, and you provide those documentation later. Through a number of these RFEs and NOIDs and denials, we found that USCIS wants us to structure partials in a different way now. Now they want to see as much upfront documentation as possible. So, for example, if the balance of your investment is coming from a HELOC or a personal loan, they at least want to see the source of funds for that home in the initial application, and they absolutely want to see an approved loan agreement. So it's still viable. I just think it needs to be structured very differently. One thing I tell my clients is that your balance has to come from an asset that you own today. It cannot come from future income, because you don't know if you're still going to have that income. I tell my clients, be careful if the balance of your investment is going to come from RSUs or stocks. Yes, you own that asset today, but stocks, as we know, especially in the crazy market we're in, they go up and down. So if it goes down below what you were going to use to contribute to the balance, you can't change your source of funds now. CIS has told us they do not want you changing your source of funds or substituting your source of funds. So it's just going to be structured carefully. Still viable, but we're going to be more careful.
Nicolai, maybe, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah,
and maybe
I agree with that.
It's not that well structured.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think that, it's in the law that you should be able to be in the process of investing. So it's hard to see how, if you do the things that Niral just outlined, USCIS would have a basis to deny. That said, I would much prefer somebody to do a full investment. And if they can't quite meet that standard, we talked in the pre-call about what's the difference between a skeletal filing and a partial investment that fully complies. And again, full compliance has come about only because of USCIS RFEs and NOIDs. And I always sort of am a little reluctant to rely on that as gospel, because they can always change their mind or tighten their standards. Referencing the memo that Rohit referenced, that came out yesterday about denying incomplete petitions without issuing an RFE or NOID. So I agree, partials can be done, but I will have a conversation with the client about it to understand so that the client understands the potential risk for sure. And this also ties into what I said earlier about maintaining underlying status, right? If you have an F student who is not going to be able to maintain their underlying status and they do a partial investment, that's a different risk profile in some ways than an H-1B who has underlying status to fall back on, right? I mean, I have had clients whose I-526 was denied and whose I-485 is denied shortly after that, and they don't have underlying status anymore. They're in a very difficult position, whereas they're in a different position if they're able to maintain that underlying status. So it's complicated, it's nuanced. I think anyone who's looking at going forward with EB-5 needs to discuss these things with their attorneys and to understand, what risk are they taking on? Should I do a partial? Should I wait? Those kinds of things are important to understand.
And really, maybe Nicolai and Niral both spoke very well to the point that preparation is key, which I'm sure that you would fully agree with. What about the expectations of when the remainder of the funds need to be remitted? What sort of aspect could that play into this this funding scenario?
Terrific, thank you. And clearly that's equally important because that's where the regional center, such as CanAm, gets into play, because we would expect the regional center's support in terms of accepting a partial payment, allowing for the filing of the petition based on a partial, and the regional center and the investor would have an agreement in place which would clearly identify and define the time limit within which the investor has to invest the balance of the monies. And I'm fairly sure that the leash that you would give the investor, it's not going to be a very long one, because it would not make sense from your perspective or the investor's perspective. So all these things need to come into play to allow for a partial filing and for the application to be submitted as complete, to probably comply with the guidance that the USCIS issued yesterday. So the regional centers have an equally important role to play, or if not more important, because just because the investor wants to do a partial filing, and even if the attorney is willing to go ahead with it, the investor isn't going to be able to do it without the backing from the regional center and the support from the regional center. So that's very important.
And if I could just quickly add to that, it's not just a matter of completing the funding. Don't forget, we still have to do the source of funds for that balance as well, and that takes its own time. So there is a timing. So it's not just a matter of meeting the funding deadline. We also need to file a supplemental report and try to get that report into USCIS as close to the funding deadline as possible.
Yeah. Well, and I think, lying over the top of all this conversation is you need to have the advanced preparedness of your petition. You need to meet the deadline that has been contemplated with the regional center that you work with. What are the repercussions of this? Because I think sometimes there are in times past, last year or even maybe, I think the assumption is, well, there's going to be some interaction with USCIS if they don't find this to be up to the standard. What do you guys tell us about your experience with the interaction that you've had if USCIS does not find this to be well prepared, or if you were given 60 days by a regional center and you funded on the 72nd day? What sort of response have you gotten from that?
Oh, I've seen straight denials.
That's your worst case scenario.
That's a worst case scenario.
Denial straight away, or you'll get an RFE, and if you have the 60 days or 75 days or 30 days, if it's annoyed, to respond, and you don't have the documents, you're looking at a denial. I think those days are gone when you might get a second bite at the apple of a second RFE or a second NOID. I haven't seen that in a while, but so that's the risk.
And I think that that's the point. Is I think that sometimes there is maybe an assumption, or maybe just we'll be able to correct this. We'll have our chance to explain it, when, as Niral pointed out, the response could just be a denial. And it's one of those things that we bring it up just as people who are looking to move, they want to move fast, and they look at this as a strategy. It can't be supplanting good prior preparation.
I do think that part of it comes from us as an immigration counsel is to counsel our clients on whatever their proposed strategy is. Just because they propose a strategy doesn't always make it a viable strategy. And so that's a lot of that's up to us to counsel them and let them know that, hey, you can't do this, because if you do this, then this is most likely the outcome. So we have to, we have to prep our clients properly as well.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
say
well
just
said.
follow up on that. I mean, it goes to placeholder filings as well, right? Like many people are looking to just file a skeletal petition before the deadline to secure a good priority date. But we have seen a significant shift in the language used in NOIDs, in RFEs, and in denials about approvability when filed. And that's reflected in the memo that came out yesterday. Now, I think that this does not have a lot of support in the law. What is an RFE for, if not to ask questions about the evidence submitted? But the language that we see almost presupposes that, oh, well, you should have submitted absolutely everything, and the fact that we're issuing this RFE proves that it was not approvable when filed. That almost seems to be the logic. It's a bit tortured, the logic, but that is definitely language that we're seeing appearing more and more. And that's what worries us as practitioners. Where is that line? What is a sufficiently fleshed out partial filing versus a skeletal filing? And that's a bit of judgment based on experience and feedback from USCIS, which again comes in the form of RFEs and NOIDs.
Yeah. No, which is helpful, and which is why, again, we as a regional center defer to the work of you gentlemen and the other attorneys that we work with, because we will oftentimes get that sort of conversation point of, hey, my source of funds should be very straightforward because it's in the U.S. It's one that we hear a lot, or hey, I'm going to do a partial funding because I just want to get this in to make sure I have my priority date set, which has always been one that's kind of come up. And it's a point that comes up, especially now as we're sitting here in August and we're looking at a September deadline. But it always needs to be well done. And we've talked about this point over and over again, but taking into account that you've always needed to have a good, strong source of funds, but especially in the environment now and getting the real-time feedback that we're getting from the actual adjudications and the actual cases that you guys are having, it's more important than ever. And obviously that's important. And so now that we've kind of talked to people who have, they come in, they know they want to do EB-5. We've talked to them about their need to do a good, strong petition, their need to, potentially if they want to do a partial funding, do that as well. Now we've come to that point in the conversation where we say your partial funding is not going to be strong enough to get you approved as you get to that point. It's looking like you're going to be a candidate to be filing in, say, October or November. What would that potentially mean for someone? Because the September 30th deadline is one that we bring up all the time for investors. But there's also a pretty important deadline coming in January 1st, in that there is going to be an inflation index increase to the investment level that is going to bring the investment level for anywhere from $130,000 to $140,000 high. So now, as you talk to clients, is that part of a conversation when you talk to people in terms of just making good pragmatic decisions and their forward planning?
I can speak to that. I mean, it's, we have the grandfathering provision in the RIA, which is great. We've never had a provision like that before. And as a result, we have the deadline that we have. It's manufactured, if you will, by the grandfathering provision. But we've all been through many deadlines in the past that didn't have grandfathering provisions, and people filed petitions up until the very last date it was possible to file and still be received before the expiration of the program. And there have been some lapses, and there have been some times where we have wondered, hey, is the program going to be re-extended? But historically, it has been. And I think that there's confidence on both sides of the aisle and in the industry that EB-5 will be extended. I happen to be one of the people that believes that. And so while September 30th is a real deadline. Of course, it exists in the law. That period between September 30th, 2026 and September 30th, 2027 is not no man's land. There still is an immigration strategy that may be viable for people depending on their circumstances. And, we'll, I think, begin to have more discussions with potential applicants after September 30th. But even now, as you say, when we're talking to applicants who just can't do it, right? Maybe they have RSUs or still stuck in a lockup period. It's just not going to happen. It's not necessarily the end of the world. And then the next sort of deadline that they have to then consider is January 1st.
I would actually.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think, as crazy as immigration seems right now, I would still say that, like Nicolai was saying, that we have a lot more certainty today than I think we've ever had in this program before. I mean, we used to go through roller coasters when the EB-5 was attached to the spending bill. Like, constantly every 3-4 months we would have sunsets and crazy rushes. Here we've had a relatively good last 3-4 years, and we're approaching this deadline. The program still doesn't end for another year. So I think, I'm cautiously optimistic that USCIS will continue to accept cases. I'm definitely optimistic of reauthorization. So I think ultimately we're going to be fine. But like Nicolai said, this is a little bit of an artificial deadline. And I don't blame people for wanting to get in at this time. But anyone who files afterwards, I think they're still going to be fine as well.
I think the only thing I would add to what Nicolai and Niral have said is there is still the provision of I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen after October 1. Yes, we're all very cautiously optimistic and very optimistic about reauthorization of the program because there are just so many reasons for the reauthorization and really none for no reauthorization. But I still wouldn't be comfortable telling a client that, yes, 100%, I'll file your application after October 1 and it will be accepted by the Immigration Service. The Immigration Service does have a way of surprising us, rather unpleasantly, I would say. So I would be very cautious on that side.
Yeah, and I agree with all the optimism. I think that the program has shown such great benefits to the overall economy. There's bipartisan support. It's a economic stimulus program. I think everyone in this industry needs to, and rightfully so, believe that will continue to go forward, and that should be go without saying. But I think that a main takeaway for a client is definitely, if you have the ability to move forward and you're prepared and you have funds available and you've sourced them or you're close to sourcing them or in the process with your immigration attorney, you should definitely be looking to make an investment before September 30th, because why would you not? But whether that's through a more traditional full funding, through a partial funding, through any of those sorts of mechanisms. But the sky has not fallen if your time frame requires a little bit more in order to have a good, strong, well put together petition, and that time frame to complete that is one that's after September 30th. I think that is good advice as well. Maybe as we come close to conclusion here, gentlemen, if you have any last thoughts or anything that you'd like to impart on people, Rohit, maybe if you want to start us off.
Sure. I think I'll go back to where we started. If you're ready to move ahead, absolutely engage with your immigration attorney. I think the process of engaging with the immigration attorney, determining which regional center you want to invest in, they're all parallel processes. These are not processes where you're following one after another. The attorney is, I think, the most important, simply because that's usually going to take the longest to determine the source of funds, and the regional centers are going to be more comfortable if the investors have engaged with an attorney, especially an experienced attorney in the EB-5 space, because that's, I think, going to allow for a more smooth filing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would say don't rush for the sake of rushing. I mean, I think this is a big financial commitment. Immigration is already stressful enough. A lot of people are here on F1, H1B, and there's a lot of uncertainty there. So you don't want to rush for the sake of rushing. I think take a look at your sort of finances, what can you do? What can you do well in terms of documentation and play according to that?
Nicolai?
Yeah, I would echo all of that. Everyone's, sort of life situation is nuanced and complicated and individual. And I think that if you have an interest in EB-5 and you've been looking at it for a long time, you may well be ready to pull the trigger now. You've done your homework, you understand the program and the benefit that it might provide to you, the immigration benefit. But if you're just starting out, you're just beginning to educate yourself, it may not be feasible to finish and conclude something in a rush that you may later regret, because it is a big commitment, it's a big investment. Under either of those scenarios, schedule a consultation with an immigration attorney. I mean, if not this week, next week, if you want to go forward. We're getting close here, so we can pull rabbits out of hats, but only to a certain extent. If you want to file by September 30th, you really need to be calling one of the three of us in the next week or two, I would say.
I agree. Good advice, all. Well, thank you guys. I think this was all really tremendous advice and really helpful insights into the current state of the market for Indian investors. Really appreciate all of your guys' time. For everyone who's listening, please, if you have questions for CanAm, project related, program related, please feel free to reach out. If you have any questions for Nicolai, Rohit, and Niral, please reach out to them. They are great resources, and we appreciate your time, and good luck, and let's all make good EB-5 decisions out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.